Hello, everyone. I am Claudio Mugan, the host of the Spiritual Inspired podcast, and my guest today is Zofia Rennea Morales. Zofia is an award-winning global strategist and former biophysicist. She had it all: a high-power career, a loving husband, gorgeous properties, adventure, good friends, you name it. She was living the dream until her fast-paced life screeched to a halt and left her in pieces. Brought to the edge of death by undiagnosed chronic Lyme disease, and was left bankrupt in every area of her life. Desperate for a miracle, Sophia cried her most heartfelt prayer: I will do anything to get better. This single prayer triggered an unanticipated Kundalini awakening, a spiritual activation that unlocked Sophia's gifts as an intuitive, healer, and mystic, changing her life completely. Sophia is the host of the talk radio program Sovereign Self and the creator of the Conscious Enlightenment Process. Sophia, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Claudio. I'm so thrilled to be here. I love doing this.
Me too. I just mentioned that your life came to a halt. And before that, were you interested in spirituality at all?
I was raised in how to put it diplomatically, a very fundamentalist sector of Lutheranism. And there was no dancing, there was no drinking. Everybody is sinful and shameful, and everybody's going to hell unless they believed our particular flavor of Lutheranism. And it left me with a lot of scars, quite frankly. And so for a long time, I'd gone through it and questioned, as some of us do, what this doesn't seem quite right, right? Because what I know and experience of God is that loving, forgiving would never send every other person to hell except for the handful of us in this particular flavor. It's like this doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't make sense to me, but it left me so traumatized that it took me decades, literally, to pick apart the relationship with God as being distinct from the religious aspect of it. And it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I had even gotten to the point that it's like, okay, I can say the word without being triggered, you know, um, and then was able to start developing a relationship. But it was very hard. I was very distant from the divine for the lion's share of my life, as a matter of fact, because of that early upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, you are three out of three guests I interviewed lately, and they're all women, and they all went through the same rigid customs and dogma through their families. And some of them were Presbyterian, but the rules were pretty much the same. The idea of hell if you are not behaving, and kind of forcing attending the church, and it wasn't anything pleasurable in that experience, and it took them decades to come back from that trauma, as you
Yeah,
mentioned.
I call it religious abuse. Let's just call a spade a spade. It was basically religious abuse. And yeah, it's a process to work your way through that. I think in some ways it was a blessing. I always try and look for where's the silver lining in this. Uh, it has, for me, made it two totally different things. Religion is one thing, and relationship with God is another thing. And I've arrived at the point that religion at its highest and best, and I think as it was originally conceived to be, if you're looking back at the teachings of Jesus Christ when he was walking this earth, if you're looking at the Buddha while he was walking this earth, if you're looking at Muhammad while he was walking this earth, they had very close personal experience with and relationship with the divine. And they taught their disciples, their followers, whatever name you want to use for them, how to have that relationship as well, and provided guidance. And I would say probably guidelines as opposed to rules. And then it starts to morph after the original source has passed on to another plane, and the rules become more rigid, and man starts to, well, we're humans, right? We're going to bring who we are to this process. And I think at some point the religion begins to take on a life of its own and become concerned with its own perpetuation over, the experience of the followers having this close relationship with the divine. And then it further gets potentially permutated into, patriarchy or politics or whatever. We're doing good deeds in the world. Okay, well, that's a beautiful thing, but there's this relationship that needs to go along with that. So it's kind of given me a lot of perspective on religion and how it functions in this world and the many ways it can function in this world, some of them more constructive than others.
Yes, and I think people don't want to acknowledge and accept the fact that the church as an institution somehow moved away from the scripture and the Yeshua's teachings pretty much. And everything which we celebrate as religious events these days and ceremonies have not been named or created or mentioned by Yeshua at any type in any time,
Yeah,
and they are not mentioned in the New Testament, Old Testament, nothing like that. So
yeah,
they're all
exactly.
created artificially, in my opinion, at least by the church. And the more I
Yes,
think
and
about,
it was a very pragmatic thing.
yeah,
They were created by the church because the church was going to take over the world because they're the only ones who know the true path. And so a lot of what we celebrate on the liturgical calendar, especially in the Protestant, I can't speak to Muslim or some of these others, but especially on the Protestant, because the Europeans were big on we're taking over the world and we're better than everybody else. Um, they went and they looked at, well, what are the local celebrations? They're celebrating Samhain. Okay, well, let's see what can we make that into that attaches to our religion so that they can still have the celebration, but it's not this pagan quote unquote thing.
yes, indeed. And if I have to be very practical, a good thing that the church did in Europe, at least, is the architecture they left behind, the cathedrals, the
Oh,
monasteries. Uh, they just put in light or brought forward our creativity and how good we are at doing good things when we want to do good things. And in
exactly.
a way, it doesn't have a, let's say, a good connotation. Why? Because a lot of people worked there and died and were taxed in order for the rich to create these edifices, to celebrate God. But at the same time, again, is a celebration of human
Absolutely.
creativity.
Yeah, beautiful, glorious, kind of the height of what man can produce in that moment. Yeah, I agree. Some of the other things that have come out of what I want to say, God, this religion, the Catholic Church, let's just call it out, became a political force in Europe at some point, but they did leave a few things behind that were good, like the international banking system. They did do a few good things with that process in that it facilitated trade in many ways, that kind of stuff. They also did some absolutely horrendous things like massacring thousands of people in the Middle East in the name of the possession of the Holy Land, which it's not yours, people.
Yes.
Yeah,
Let's move the discussion right now to something which hopefully will trigger good memories. I read
I like that.
the fact that you visited a nutritionist at one point when you were sick, and you found a book in while waiting to see the
The
professional.
herbalist,
Yeah,
yes, it
what
was
was
an
the book?
herbalist naturopath.
Yeah, what
Yes,
was the
the
book?
book was called The Emotion Code, and it really got my attention because I was raised by a German and a Norwegian. And so, what I was taught about emotions growing up was there are only a handful of acceptable ones you can have, and they should be used very sparingly and not in the extreme. So you can be happy, you can be a little pleased with yourself, and you can be angry, but you can't be full on angry. It has to be a controlled kind of anger, and everything else you need to like shove down and pretend that it's not there.
Yes, I mean, I think we have to have our own rebuff, our own expression when that is unbearable. But from, let's say, Hinduism point of view, what
Hmm.
they suggest is to keep an even emotional status or balance. So you are not on a roller coaster
Yeah,
and you are not on a fight or flight situation all the time, so your nervous system is in balance. But
yeah,
again, it doesn't have
exactly.
anything to do with not expressing your feelings when you feel like doing it.
Right, or not having feelings in the first place, right? Because our emotions are here to serve us and to protect us in many ways, to let us know when we're on the right track for things that are good for us, to let us know that when we're on the wrong track and we've messed up, right? And it might be time to make apologies or amends to somebody. Um, and so there are a lot of good purposes for your emotions if you are taught to understand what they are and to deal with them in a way that is, what should I say, constructive. Okay. The way I was taught to deal with my emotions, because I think of them as kind of the messenger, if you will. Hey, something's happened over here that you might want to pay attention to for whatever reason. Might be a good reason, might be a bad reason. And what how I was trained to deal with the emotions is like the FedEx man shows up with this emotional package for me, and I decide I don't like who sent that. I'm pretty sure I don't want to look in it, and so I'm going to punish him by tying him to the chair in my kitchen. Now, is this going to make anything better? No, it's not going to change anything about what's in that box. In fact, it's going to make things far worse because I've not dealt with what's in that package. And so it's important to receive the emotion, receive the message, and then allow the emotion to pass on. And that was the thing that I had not been trained in. And the emotion code was a beautiful place to start with that because it allowed me to unpack these decades of suppressed crap. When I went to my last talk therapist, she asked why I was here. I said, because my insides, it's like I've got so much pent up stuff stacked around. It's almost like I'm moving out of my house. You know how you get everything packed up, the movers haven't arrived yet and there's no space to move because nothing is where it belongs. It was like that in my emotional life, and every time I turn around I'm knocking something over and it's spilling out and it's gotten out of hand. And while it was helpful working with her, the emotion code was like a lifesaver because it allowed me to really rapidly unpack that stuff without getting so deeply sunk into it uh, that I just couldn't function.
Yes, and you provided a visual um, comparison. Let's bring add another sense to it. It's like you have leaves and you keep adding leaves for compost. And
Yes.
at one point, because you keep adding and they're fermenting, the smell is very powerful.
Oh, yeah.
So it can come forward, come through, and you don't only have no space to move, but it also smells nasty. So you have to, it's festering, you have to do something about it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's like the next step in my analogy of the FedEx man, right? You leave him tied up in the kitchen long enough, it's going to get really bad and really nasty, and he will fester and smell.
Yes,
We don't wish that on any FedEx man.
no, no. So yeah, so you had your awakening, the Kundalini awakening. Was that pretty instant or it lasted several days? Did you feel special over
It
that period of
was,
time?
yeah, it was a process that unwound over a couple of weeks. And I there were two things that kind of kicked it off. First, I invited it. I didn't realize that I had, but I had invited it because I'd reached this low point in my life where I quite literally had no answers. I was between the rock and the hard place, and all of the options were out for me. Okay. And to the point that the insurance wasn't going to help. My husband's working and going full time to school and taking care of me because I can't function. So he can't, come up with the money needed for my treatment. And okay, so what are we going to do? I called my dad. I'm like, it's the last thing I can think of because I'm not employable. My brain's not working. I can't make a 30-minute meal in 3 hours. So, I mean, I'm clearly not going to be suitable for employment right now. We're in a bankruptcy. We can't take out a loan or use a credit card or something because none of that's available either. And so I called my dad, figuring, if there is a moment in this time where it's appropriate for a child to say, look, I need help over this next thing in order to take back my independence, I think it's probably this one. And I called my father and explained the situation to him, that I had a diagnosis. We have a plan. The insurance is not stepping in. I've got no place, no way to pay for this. And until I get better, I don't have a way to earn the money required to even pay for this. And the bank of dad was empty that day. And it was a really low point. You know how they say you hit bottom and then you hit like rock bottom? This was the rock bottom moment. And I was in the bed that night waiting for morning, basically, because my brain had deteriorated to the point that I was not going through normal sleep cycles. And so I would get in the bed and relax, rest, attempt to meditate as much as I can, because I found that that would refresh me somewhat in lieu of sleeping, since sleeping was not a physical possibility at that time. And that night, my brain was like a trapped squirrel. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, we can try this, we can try that. And, hitting all of these walls that I've already bashed my head into, 100 million times. And it was around 3 in the morning that I decided it might be time to have conversation with God, who I had not talked to in decades, probably 35 years, easy. And with all my being, I said, God, I will do anything to get better. And I immediately got my answer, because the little voice said, really, anything? And the voice had a point. So I sat with that for a little while and thought about where my edges were. And I think they're, in some ways, pretty standard edges. I'm not going to cheat people. I'm not going to lie. I won't axe murder people. I want to treat people fairly and, spread goodness in the world. And I want to be treated fairly in return. And I thought about what I understood of God, not all of the Old Testament garbage that I had been raised with, but actual experience of God and what I knew as a small child to be true about God. And I came to the conclusion that God, as I understand God, would not ask me to do any of those things. And so, to be clear, I said, God, so we're clear who I'm talking to and who this deal is with. I will do anything for you. And I got my first miracle because I fell asleep. And then I awoke with some knowings that led me down the road to the book that you talked about. And as I was going through the book, he talks about heart wells in there. And when I saw the chapter, it's like, yeah, I got one of those. I don't have to muscle test or anything to know that there's one of those. And he made a good case for taking it down. And so I started to take it down. And as I started to take it down, that's when all of the stuff starts to happen. And the scientist in me is going apeshit, because you don't see disembodied entities and fairies and devic energies in the plants and the animals, and that You don't do that. This means you have more brain damage than you realized.
Yeah, you cannot measure them for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had some of those kind of experiences. And then I had some visions from the past and from the future. And it's like, yeah, your imagination is like really running away with you. And then there was a morning I had seen an angel, like actually seen an angel. And I'm not, it's still amazing to me because that's not one of my natural psychic channels. Clairvoyance is like the last thing I get typically. And at that time, I wouldn't have even called it that. Right then, it was this particular flavor of brain damage. And after I saw the angel, I actually said a prayer in Hebrew. Okay, I was raised in Minnesota. I think there are exactly 10 Hebrew men in the metropolitan area in Minneapolis and St. Paul to have one temple. I think that's kind of the extent of it. So it's not like I was exposed to this in the environment where I grew up. And after it came out, I'm like, okay, let me scribble down the phonetics of what this thing is that I just said. And I looked it up, and it's a candle lighting ceremony. Like, oh, wow. No explanation for that one. None whatsoever. And I just kind of shoved that one to the side as kind of extraneous data. Sometimes you get outlier points when you shove that
Yes,
over
yes,
there.
indeed.
And so that happened, and I keep discounting all of the stuff that's happening, and I'm feeling things in my body as I'm like walking through grocery stores. It's like, wow, I suddenly have this backache or this headache or something like that. And then after I leave the store, it's better. And walking into Walmart, it's the energetic equivalent of walking into a rock concert at full volume, Stones in full flight. Boom, it's a little literal physical hit in your body. I'm like, geez, I've always been kind of a sensitive person, but not that kind of sensitive person. It's like I cry at long distance commercials and Hallmark cards. This is a whole different level of sensitivity. And I'm still trying to figure out what to make of this. And I came home from the grocery store one afternoon, and I see my neighbors pulling into the driveway. And okay, I look over to wave at them, and she's staggering under his weight, trying to get him into the house. He's clearly doubled over in a great deal of pain. The ice cream can melt. So we go and help them in the house. And she's explaining that she's really worried for him. His kidneys have gotten so bad and she needs to make an emergency appointment. I'm like, well, you go do that. I'll stay here with him. It's not a big deal. And, try and keep him company, make him comfortable, whatever I can do. And there's really nothing you can do for somebody with kidney pain. There's no comfortable position. There's nothing that's going to relieve it. And so we ended up just standing in the living room, and I'm holding his hands to provide a little human comfort if I can. And he closes his eyes, and I can see his lips are moving. And I know them both to be very devout people. Some of the best kind of devout religious people that I know. They're very non judgmental, but yet very, what do I want to say, convicted in their beliefs and their understandings, but they're not going to beat anyone up else up who
Yeah.
doesn't hold it. And so I didn't want to voyeur this conversation he's having with God. And so I said, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and give him his privacy. And as I close my eyes, I see in my mind's eye this little tiny flame. It looks like a pilot light, and it's flickering and dancing like they do on the verge of going. And I'm given to know that that's exactly where he is with his life force right now. It's at a super low ebb, and he's on the edge of just disappearing. Like, wow. And I haven't even acknowledged who I'm talking to yet. My last conversation with God 2 weeks previously, that's the last time I talked to him. And so I asked in my mind and said, is there something we can do about that? Now, why would I, as a scientist, even imagine there's anything we can do about that? But it was something that came spontaneously through me, um, on a wave of what I would best describe as compassion for what he was going through. And the instant I finished the thought, is there something we can do? That flame turned into this roaring bonfire. And I don't know how big it got because my eyes whipped open when he dropped my hands. And he says, "Are you a healer?" And I'm looking to see who he's talking to, because this is not something that has entered my possibility at all, full stop, ever. Are you kidding me? Faith healing? No. And I was saved from having to answer because his wife came back. "I got the appointment. We've got to leave right now." Okay, great. So we hustle them out into the car, and I go hide in my house for 2 days because ain't got no explanation for that. Nothing that works for the scientist here.
Yeah.
No. No, no, no. And after 2 days, I had managed to convince myself nothing had happened, pure imagination. And I'm a very bad neighbor because I have not brought over soup or casserole or seen if I can, take care of the cats while she's sitting in the ICU, or God help me, planning the funeral. And so I finally got up the nerve to go next door. And I tapped on the door, thinking I won't get an answer because she's off doing one of those other things. And she opens the door. I'm like, oh, she's home. And she's smiling. I'm like, okay, so
Good sign.
probably no funeral. And she says, "Oh, good, come on in. Jay has so many questions for you." I'm like, "Jay's home?" Because I fully expected he was going to be in the hospital. And I walk in the living room, and he's kicked back in his Barca lounger. He's got a drink at his elbow. He's got his remote. He's got his book, and he's looking fat and happy. I'm like, "How you doing?" He says, "Pretty good. It was the strangest thing." I'm like, "What do you mean?" By the time I got to the doctor, I was feeling pretty good. And they ran me through the whole mess of tests that they usually run, and my kidney function came back normal. This is a man who's had kidney disease for over 2 decades, who they're considering putting on dialysis any second.
Wow. Interesting.
And he's back to normal. And that was the moment where the scientist had to sit down and shut the fuck up. Because clearly this is part of the anything I have agreed to, and all of this crap I've been writing off. I probably need to take a closer look at that.
Hmm. So how did your family react to your newfound capabilities?
I was really super concerned about that because I'm married to another very scientific intellectual who does I say he does drugs. He develops new drugs for the pharmaceutical industry. He's that kind of brilliant soul. And so I was extremely concerned about telling him anything about any of this because I'm having trouble with it. How is he going to react, right? And it took me about 6 months to kind of really settle into, this is what's actually happening with me. This is not a brain damage thing. This is an actual real thing. And I had a conversation with him, and he took it so much better than I did. And I believe I have my mother-in-law to thank for that, because she's always been a very spiritual woman, religious as well as spiritual, and would talk about miracles and thank her angels for parking spots and this kind of thing. And I think having been raised by someone who was that spiritually connected and dialed in made it much easier for him when his wife is 2 + 2 = 4. I'm from Missouri. Show me wife says, um, "I think I'm claircognizant and clairsentient, and there's been some strange things happening for me recently."
So since then, I assume your mother-in-law became your best friend. She was elated.
We've always been best friends, honestly. Um, so yeah, but that was it was a good conversation. He was actually really good with it. I have, quite frankly, not come out to my family about it, particularly my mother, because she has a very rigid worldview. There is only one way to see the world, and I have learned over the years it's best to just allow her worldview. And she sees me a certain way, I'm going to allow her to continue to see me that way.
Does she need any healing or anyone in your side of the family? You can prove your point as a
Uh,
scientist also.
well, I mean, as a scientist, I could probably attempt to go down that road, but here's the thing. Um, she's well set in her ways. And I've received more than enough, what I want to say, harsh handling and hard words from her. And I see no reason to open myself up to more. Um, my nephew, her grandson, is what I want to say. He is a very spiritual embodied being on this earth. Um, and he did not have the same extreme religious background upbringing that I have. And he does really good outreach work in this world, under what I want to say, conventional religious guise. And he's the one I think that is intended to reach her because he can speak that language in a calm and balanced way to her in a way that I can't.
Yeah, interesting. And have been many more healings since, of course, you discover these gifts to people who were not aware that you possess these gifts.
As a matter of fact, it's funny you should bring that up. Um, I have a lady that I knew in a business group. I won't share her name or the name of the business group, but she had a rather catastrophic collision with a truck, a semi truck, as a matter of fact. And I didn't know her particularly well. I mean, I knew a little about her and her business from being in this group together, the way you kind of know a business acquaintance. And one day I got a message from her through Facebook, which I think we'd exchanged like two messages before. Hey, how's it going? You want to, have a coffee chat and try and arrange a time to get to know each other better? And we had not managed to do that for whatever reason. And so she sent this direct message, and it basically was like four super short little lines. It was like bad car accident, in emergency room, please help, and phone batteries going, something like that. So she kind of sketched out at a very high level that she needed assistance and that I wasn't going to be hearing from her for a while. And so I connected in with my intuition, with my God squad, I call them, my spiritual guides. And it's like, what do I need to do for her? And they're like, it's pretty bad. And so I have a set of processes that I go through that clear trauma out of the body, that allow it to do accelerated healing, that sort of thing. So I went through those processes a couple of times a day for the next couple of days, and then it was like once a day out until the end of the week. And she actually reached out to me at the end of the week. I'm like, oh, good to hear from you. Are you doing okay? What happened? This kind of thing. And it was at that point that I found out they called her family, her son, her fiance, and said, get here now, she's going to die. Okay. She has no memory of sending me the message for help. Okay. And it's not like somebody else would have done that for her. There would be no reason, right? They're looking for the boyfriend, they're looking for the son, they're not looking for some random lady in a business group someplace. So we don't have any explanation in the 3D world on why I got that message. I think her soul sent me that message, frankly.
Yeah, and she had to leave for other purposes, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so they called them in, and the prognosis was she's going to die. And then she stabilized shortly after I had received this message. And then they were saying, well, since she's stabilized, we're going to try and do surgery to stop the brain bleeding. And they were getting ready to go do the surgery for the brain bleeding. They weren't sure they were going to be able to work with the spleen or not, but they were going to get her prepped for the brain surgery. And the brain bleeding stopped on its own. And so they canceled the brain surgery and said, well, okay, we're going to schedule a different surgeon, a different operating room, and we're going to work on the spleen. And the spleen stopped bleeding and started to recover on its own. So they canceled that surgery. And after, I think it was after 4 days, they moved her out of ICU into the regular hospital. And then they sent her home on day 7.
Those doctors might have been so upset. They couldn't do their job.
I think they were really perplexed. And actually, I think this is one of these moments where, what do I want to say, subconscious discrimination kind of worked in her favor because she is a woman of color. And I think had she been a white woman, they'd have cracked her head open like that. And so I think in this case, the fact that they kind of took their time was actually a blessing for her because they'd have done more damage, I think, than they would have done good if they'd cracked her head open.
Lucky her. Lucky
Yeah,
her.
and she's recovered quite a bit. I mean, when they started to cancel these surgeries, they were still talking to her family and saying things like, you may not recognize your mom as your mom after this because personality changes and we don't know how much brain damage there is, and she may not talk, she may not walk, she may not, the whole list of stuff that might not come
Mm.
back after you've had a terrible head injury. And it was a long road back to regaining what she needs, but she is back in her business. She is fully self-employed. She got a nice settlement out of the accident. So in many ways, it worked out really good for her. And she also was able to connect into her divinity a lot more deeply after having had this near-death experience. So there were a lot of amazing blessings that came out of it, but it was a physically very difficult situation.
Yes. I'm glad for the happy ending.
Yes, me too. I call her my miracle woman.
Sophia, do you communicate with specific ascending masters or just regular spiritual guides?
Um, we all have specific masters that sit on our council, some of them more permanently than others. What I have been shown from my own council, and I've seen this with other people's council as well, is there tends to be a core of between 3 and 6 that sits on your core council that's always there. There's going to be your personal spirit guide. There's going to be a couple of ascended masters depending on what your particular mission in this world is. And there'll be some other, what do I want to call, higher vibrational spirit guides. It's not like your spirit guides that are down here with you every day, but like a layer or two above that.
Mhm.
Um, and the ones that sit with you, like through all the lifetimes, are typically your spirit guide and those 2 or 3 layers above that spirit guide. The ascended masters kind of rotate in and out as needed. Specialists will rotate in and out as needed. And what I've noticed with mine is that I have that core, and then there are like these specialist seats. And so Raphael will be there for a while, Gabriel will be there for a while, depending on what it is I'm supposed to be moving into. But Metatron seems to be a standard. He's always there.
Mhm.
Michael is always there on mine.
Interesting. And for those who keep trying, connecting to their spiritual guides and fine-tuning their senses, what would you recommend? Because sometimes these messages could be so subtle, we might not understand them and disregard them. So
Yeah,
what
yeah,
should we
and
do?
that's kind of the challenge. And what I recommend, because I do this, once or twice a year, I run this course that I call Activate Your Spiritual Superpowers. And I'll be doing another one of those coming up in probably, well, I'll probably be opening registration for it in November, and it'll probably run at the beginning of 2023. But what I recommend is get yourself a little notebook, okay? Because spirit is sort of like, it's almost like playing charades in a way, okay? Because you don't have all the information you would normally have to relate this information. And so there will be symbols that are used, and there is some universal definition to symbols, but the overriding definition for any particular symbol is what it means to you. And so it's important to kind of keep track of, okay, I was going down the road and there was this butterfly that showed up. At the same time, there was this guy on the side of the road, and I decided to pull over and, help him, get a phone call for a tow truck or whatever it was. Okay. And so maybe the butterfly, just kind of noting that the butterfly was there when you felt this urge to do this, may mean something in your lexicon of communication with spirit. Okay. And it's different for every person. The butterfly comes to me a lot because that's one that is a strong communicator to me that you're on the right track, you're doing the right thing out in the world. The hummingbird shows up for me when it's like, do this right now. You can do this right now. And so it's one of these things that you need to kind of gather your own language around it. Because, yeah, there are universal messages for hummingbird, and you can Google those. It's like spirit animal hummingbird, and it'll tell you all this stuff. But the first thing is what it means to you. My grandmother loves orioles, the really black birds with the bright orange wings. And when an oriole shows up for me, it is my grandmother saying, I love you. You're doing well. I see you. That's the only time I ever see an oriole. They don't have any other message to me than you are loved. You're treasured.
So in your case, with your grandmother and the Oriole, will the Oriole show up if your grandmother will still around, or your grandmother still could pass through on a different
It
dimension?
it's in both
In
cases.
both cases, okay.
When I was young, I can remember preparing halves of oranges. We used to half oranges, and there was a little post out in the yard. We would go put them on, and the orioles would come and eat them. And it's weird because looking back on it, I don't know why there were orioles in that particular section of Minnesota. I never saw them anywhere else in Minnesota other than my grandmother's yard. And when she passed, wow, 25 years ago, I think now, give or take. And I was up to the cemetery. I'm going to choke up. When I was up to the cemetery a couple of years ago to see where they buried her, because I had to miss her funeral. So I didn't know exactly where the plot was. And so I was seeking it out. And I turned around. She's in this on this beautiful hill next to her favorite chapel. It's this beautiful little white Swedish chapel. And it looks out over the lake. And this oriole came and perched on the headstone.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And I'm just going to cry for a minute.
Please, please. That's beautiful. And you know what? We have something in common. Unfortunately, I miss my both grandfather and grandmother's funeral because I was 10,000 kilometers away and I just couldn't fly back home to say goodbye. So I sometimes I feel remorse and not pleased with myself that I've done that thing or I haven't been able to move forward and go back home. But
Yeah,
I know this is life.
I was blessed to actually get to say goodbye before she passed, even though I wasn't able to go to the funeral. So on some level, I don't necessarily have that regret because the funeral isn't really for her. The funeral is for the other people. Um, but when she had a stroke before she passed, and so I was able to be there with her in the hospital, and I had to go home before she actually passed away. And I woke up, it was on a Saturday morning, and I'm in that spot right between asleep and awake. This is long before my awakening. And there was grandma, um, looking fat and happy. Okay. I mean, completely recovered and vibrant and full of energy. I'm like, oh, you're doing so much better. She's like, no, I came to say goodbye.
Mm. It was a nice, tender moment, at
Yeah.
least. That's great. Sorry I made you cry.
No, it's all good.
Uh, Sophia, let's come back to today, today's events. In the last 2.5 years, life was very harsh for everyone, no matter the age bracket, region, location,
Lots
anything
of
else.
interesting
Yeah.
challenges. Yes.
So, what's your perception of what happened, and would we be able as humanity, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually recover from this trauma?
Uh, Trauma arrives always for a reason. And I have kind of a different perspective on this than most people. Um, Physically, a lot of the blessings that we ask for arrive in some pretty crappy ass wrapping paper. Okay. And so when life hands me a shit sandwich, now I kind of just hold my nose and bite in because I know on the end of that, there's something absolutely amazing coming my direction. I just have to remain open and curious to what it is. And if you think about the atmosphere as we were moving into 2020, there were a great many people who were trapped in jobs that they did not like, in careers that they hated, they didn't see ways out of, running so crazy fast on the rat race that they didn't have any time to think about, well, what would I do instead? And I think in many ways, what arrived with this whole pandemic situation was the opportunity, not just the opportunity. Many of us, it was a forced time out. Sit on the bench over there and really take the time you've been asking for. You've wanted time to think about this. Um, and it's hard in the moment, right? Because oh my God, the job's gone, the income's gone. How are we making the ends meet? The kids still have to eat. Or how do I work when the kids are at home and I can't leave them unsupervised? And how are we juggling this? There were a lot of really serious challenges, and I don't make light of those challenges in any way. But our souls bring us challenging things because these are the opportunities, the moments in which we can stretch to become a higher version of ourselves, to take a higher path, to choose a different way. I've noticed in my life, in the life of many of my clients, that when you're overdue for thinking about something and making a change that your soul would like to see you have because you've been asking for it, uh, you will frequently get put on the bench. Now, sometimes it shows up as a career thing, but more often it will show up as a health thing. There will be an accident, there will be an injury, there will be an illness that puts you on the bench for a certain period of time. And sometimes, if you're very determined to go back the direction you were coming from, you will lose the ability to go back that direction because it's time for you to move forward. And I think my interpretation of COVID is there were an awful lot of people going, this is so not working for me, but weren't able to, for whatever reason, and there are a lot of good reasons not to, stop, leave the job, take the time to think about it. And injury and illness are one of the few hall passes you get in society to just sit over there and think about it.
Yes, I mean they're, as you said, they're forced out and think of new ways of making a living or putting food on the table. Um, in a way, that path was smoothed out by the handouts from the government.
Yep.
But in the end, when these handouts were done, were over, people still had to come up with creative ways to survive.
Yeah, they didn't the government didn't think through all of the things like the rent moratorium that they had going on in the US. It's like, yeah, okay. So it's just mounting up, and then the landlord can claim like $8,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is down the road. This is not going to work out. There's a bunch of people going to end up evicted at the end of this because who can just yank $10,000 out of their ass?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are people who can, but the average Joe, for the most part, is like, this is way beyond. I mean, it takes me a whole year to get to that.
Yeah, I mean, I just heard a number yesterday, 8.2 million evictions coming in September and October in US. That's
Yeah.
huge, huge.
Yeah. It's going to be really huge. And it's going to be, there's going to have to be some rethinking in the landlord industry, in the rental industry, in the mortgage and house buying industry, because there's no way someone can come up with that lump sum of money. The landlord obviously wants to be paid and should be paid. I mean, it's part of the fair exchange. Um, but on the other hand, where do you go? Right? The next landlord's going to say, "You ran up what kind of a bill with the last guy, and you want me to?" So something's going to have to happen, I think, beyond this point, but the government hasn't addressed it yet because they don't quite know how it's going to show up. But yeah, it's going to be bad
Yeah, they have no idea.
in many ways. There are going to be a lot of people who are like, this sucks sideways. But on the other hand, creative solutions will come out of this. There will be things that we haven't yet imagined that will come out of this as a result of going through this process.
Yeah. Sophia, let's expand on how do you work with clients? What's your process?
What is my process? I for a long time I said I did not have a structure, but the truth of the matter is I do have a structure because I still have this type A, you know, project planner scientific side of me. And I use the troubleshooting tools that I use so successfully in my career now in the spiritual world. It's just a slightly different arena. And so typically how I work with someone is we start with the basics, which is what is it that's going on in your life that's causing you pain that you need shifted? Okay. Or where is it you're stuck on your growth trajectory that you just can't get over? Okay. And then we look at your soul contract, your life plan that you created before you came here, what you're going to work on, the tools you brought to work on it with, what your goals are, the things that excite you. Okay. And I get all of that out of the birth name. And we look at your human design to see how you're best designed to engage with this reality. And then we put together a plan. Okay, you and me, what's a priority for you, what's not a priority for you, and where we go from there depends on where you want to go. I've done a wide range of things for people, from birth plan or life contract renegotiations. Okay, because sometimes there's a repeating lesson that you are just so over and you're, no, I'm not working on it anymore. You can actually get rid of that instead of having it hound you through the rest of this life. But it's not something to be done lightly because you chose it for a reason. Um, but that is a possibility. I've done that for people. I do, what to call it, light body integrations, for lack of a better word. We bring a lot of 3D reality equipment in with us so that we can be separate beings and have this experience of separateness. And I will remove some of that virtual reality hardware from people so that they can have a clear communication to their God squad. A lot of people who are on a spiritual path find that to be desirable, and it makes things a whole lot easier. So we do some of that. Um, I have been trained in a process called divine healing, which allows for the integration of a great deal of conflicting stuff that you might have going on in your system. So it allows us to dig into things like subconscious conflicts, the source of sabotage, that sort of thing. And that's been an amazing system to work with over the years. And now I'm getting certified in hypnosis and looking to do more of the past life regression and life between life stuff to go along with the current soul contract stuff. Because sometimes what's getting to us has to do with something that we did previously. And so that has been fabulous, and I'm really enjoying that process. I feel like I've really come into my own bringing the hypnosis into the package with it.
Interesting. So you are allowed to, not necessarily allowed, so the soul, when you reach out to the soul of the
Mhm.
person, the soul will explicitly mention what's the purpose of the soul and the physical body in this lifetime, correct?
I don't usually go straight to the soul, although I can talk to the higher self and the God squad of whomever I'm working with. I am trained in a numerology called the numerology of Moses. And so if I know the name on your birth certificate and the language it was created in, I can come up with what your original soul plan is. Because that vibration, once you've created it, becomes a vibration that gets shared with your parents on a super conscious level. And so they know what your name is supposed to be super consciously, even if they don't know it consciously, which is why when you watch parents and they've got a child they're trying to name, everybody comes, Aunt Philomena, name the baby after me, right? And so they reject a whole lot of names out of hand. And there's really only a handful they ever very seriously consider because on a superconscious level, they know what they're trying to match and they'll know it when they hear it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And also during the introduction, I mentioned another program, Conscious Enlightenment Process.
Yes.
Is that in addition to what you are doing?
That is this conglomeration of
Mhm.
all of, pulling together what you're here to do, what the pain point is, what you need in your physical body, uh, to get you to where you need to be to really bring your mission forth in the world in a big sort of way. I'm sort of the success whisperer.
Nice. Zofia, from time to time, I ask my guests if they have a special relationship with water. And due to the color of your background and my background, I have to ask you this question today.
Yeah, they match identically, don't they?
And we didn't talk about that.
Yes, water is my element. If I am feeling ungrounded, if I'm in like a panic place, because occasionally even the most enlightened of us get knocked off of our center, water is my go-to. And so I don't care if it's a mud puddle, the pool in my backyard, a jacuzzi tub. Water is the thing that I need to really bring myself back down into my body and to really allow myself to connect in. And in fact, as I was working to develop my spiritual gifts after they opened up, that was the main place where I practiced. Run me a big old tub of water and sink in there and okay, let's go.
Nice, nice. Zofia, we're approaching the end of the interview. Any final thoughts?
Any final thoughts? You are unique. You are loved. I wish I could express to you how loved you are, whether you realize it or not. Um, And if you are in a dark place right now, because enlightenment tends to take place in a very, very dark spot, know that all is well. All will continue to be well, and you can surrender It's okay. You can surrender, and it's amazing what opens up when you just relax.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much for your time and for your wise words.
Well, thank you. Thank you for
And
having me. It was a pleasure having the conversation.
thank you. And to my viewers, thank you for watching. Like it, share it, download a free copy of my book when you visit my website. And until next time, love and gratitude.